Hello everyone, wishing each and every one of you a very happy Teachers' Day. So after a long time, I actually wanted to read out something aloud for all of you, and I was wondering what to read out. When I decided, let's just take a look at all those old school books of English, Hindi and Bengali literature that have been stored away all these years, and let me see if I can find something interesting. When I came across this book called Dream and Reality, it's by Evergreen Publications, and I believe not me, probably my sister would have read this book under her curriculum in her school days. And I found this really interesting extract, which is titled As Schoolmaster by none other than Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, which is Bapuji. This present piece is taken from his autobiography, The Story of My Experiments with Truth. He narrates in this extract his experiences in South Africa, where he spent a part of his early life. He writes of the school that he helped establish and where he subsequently taught for some time. Gandhiji writes in a very simple, direct style with a personal touch. So here goes. As the farm grew, it was found necessary to make some provision for the education of its boys and girls. There were, amongst these, Hindu, Mussalman, Parsi and Christian boys, and some Hindu girls. It was not possible, and I did not think it necessary, to engage special teachers for them. It was not possible, for qualified Indian teachers were scarce. And even when available, none would be ready to go to a place 21 miles distant from Johannesburg, that too on a small salary. Also, we were certainly not overflowing with money. And I did not think it necessary to import teachers from outside the farm. I did not believe in the existing system of education, and I had a mind to find out by experience and experiment the true system. Only this much I knew, that under ideal circumstances, true education could be imparted only by the parents, that there should be the minimum of outside help, that Tolstoy Farm was a family in which I occupied the place of the father, and that I should so far as possible shoulder the responsibility for the training of the young. The conception, no doubt, was not without its flaws. All the young people had not been with me since their childhood. They had been brought up on different conditions and environments, and they did not belong to the same religion. How could I do full justice to the young people thus circumstanced, even if I assumed the place of paterfamilias? But I had always given the first place to the culture of the heart or the building of character. And as I felt confident, the moral training could be given to all alike, no matter how different their ages and their upbringing. I decided to live amongst them all the 24 hours of the day as their father. I regarded character building as the proper foundation for their education, and if the foundation was firmly laid, I was sure that the children could learn all the other things themselves or with the assistance of friends. But as I fully appreciated the necessity of a literary training in addition, I started some classes with the help of Mr. Kallenbach and Pragji Desai. Nor did I underrate the building up of the body. This they got in the course of the daily routine, for there were no servants on the farm, and all the work, from cooking down to scavenging, was done by the inmates. There were many fruit trees to be looked after, and enough gardening to be done as well. Mr. Kallenbach was fond of gardening and had gained some experience of this work in one of the governmental model gardens. It was obligatory on all, young and old, who were not engaged in the kitchen, to give some time to gardening. The children had the lion's share of the work, which included digging pits, felling timber, and lifting loads. This gave them ample exercise. They took delight in the work, and so they did not generally need any other exercise or games. Of course, some of them, and sometimes all of them, malingered and shirked. Sometimes I connived at their pranks, but often I was strict with them. I dare say they did not like the strictness, but I do not recollect their having resisted it. Whenever I was strict, I would, by argument, convince them that it was not right to play with one's work. The conviction would, however, be short lived. The very next moment, they would again leave their work and go for play. All the same, we got along, and at any rate, they built up fine physiques. There was scarcely any illness on the farm, though it must be said that good air and water and regular hours of food were not a little responsible for this. A word about vocational training. It was my intention to teach every one of the youngsters some useful manual vocation. For this purpose, Mr. Callenbach went to a Trappist monastery and returned having learned shoemaking. I learnt it from him and taught the art to such as were ready to take it up. Mr. Callenbach had some experience of carpentry, and there was another inmate who knew it. So we had a small class in carpentry. Cooking almost all the youngsters knew. All this was new to them. They had never ever dreamt that they would have to learn these things someday. For generally, the only training that Indian children received in South Africa was in the 3 R's. On Tolstoy Farm, we made it a rule that the youngsters should not be asked to do what the teachers did not do, and therefore, when they were asked to do any work, there was always a teacher cooperating and actually working with them. Hence, whatever the youngsters learnt, they learnt cheerfully. Literary training, however, was a more difficult matter. I had neither the resources nor the literary equipment necessary, and I had not the time I would have wished to devote to the subject. The physical work that I was doing used to leave me thoroughly exhausted at the end of the day, and I used to have the classes just when I was most in need of some rest. Instead, therefore, of my being fresh for the class, I could with the greatest difficulty keep myself awake. The mornings had to be devoted to work on the farm and domestic duties, so the school hours had to be kept after the midday meal. There was no other time suitable for the school. We gave 3 periods at the most to literary training. Hindi, Tamil, Gujarati, Urdu were all taught, and tuition was given through the vernaculars of the boys. English was taught as well. It was also necessary to acquaint the Gujarati Hindu children with a little Sanskrit and to teach all the children elementary history, geography, and arithmetic. I had undertaken to teach Tamil and Urdu. The little Tamil I knew was acquired during the voyages and in jail. I had not got beyond people's excellent Tamil handbook. My knowledge of the Urdu script was all that I had acquired on a single voyage, and my knowledge of the language was confined to the familiar Persian and Arabic words that I had learned from contact with Mussalman friends. Of Sanskrit I knew no more than I learnt at the high school. Even my Gujarati was no better than that which one acquires at the school. Such was the capital with which I had to carry on. In poverty of literary equipment, my colleagues went one better than I. But my love for the languages of my country, my capacity as a teacher, as also the ignorance of my pupils, and more than that, their generosity, stood me in good stead. The Tamil boys were all born in South Africa and therefore knew very little Tamil and did not know the script at all. So I had to teach them the script and the rudiments of grammar. That was easy enough. My pupils knew that they could any day beat me in Tamil conversation, and when Tamilians, not knowing English, came to see me, they became my interpreters. I got along merrily because I never attempted to disguise my ignorance from my pupils. In all respite of my colossal ignorance of the language, I never lost their love and respect. It was comparatively easier to teach the Mussalman boys Urdu. They knew the script. I had simply to stimulate in them an interest in reading and to improve their handwriting. These youngsters were, for the most part, unlettered and unschooled. But I found in the course of my work that I had very little to teach them, beyond weaning them away from their laziness and supervising their studies. As I was content with this, I could pull on with boys of different ages and learning different subjects in one and the same classroom. Of textbooks, about which we hear so much, I never felt the want. I do not even remember having made much use of the books that were available. I did not find it at all necessary to load the boys with quantities of books. I have always felt the true textbook for the pupil is his teacher. I remember very little that my teachers taught me from books, but I have even now a clear recollection of the things they taught me independently of books. Children take in much more and with less labor through their ears than through their eyes. I do not remember having read any book from cover to cover with my boys, but I gave them in my own language all that I had digested from my reading of various books, and I dare say they are still carrying a recollection of it in their minds. It was laborious for them to remember what they learned from books, but what I imparted to them by word of mouth, they could repeat with the greatest ease. Reading was a task for them, but listening to me was a pleasure, when I did not bore them by failure to make my subject interesting. And from the questions that my talks prompted them to put, I had a measure of their power of understanding. The spiritual training of the boys was a much more difficult matter than their physical and mental training. I relied little on religious books for the training of the spirit. Of course, I believed that every student should be acquainted with the elements of his own religion and have a general knowledge of his own scriptures, and therefore I provided for such knowledge as best as I could. But that, to my mind, was part of the intellectual training. Long before I undertook the education of the youngsters of the Tolstoy Farm, I had realized the training of the spirit was a thing by itself. To develop the spirit is to build character and to enable one to work towards a knowledge of God and self-realization. And I held that this was an essential part of the training of the young, and that all training without culture of the spirit was of no use and might be even harmful. I am familiar with the superstition that self-realization is possible only in the fourth stage of life, that is, sannyasa or renunciation. But it is a matter of common knowledge that those who defer preparation for this invaluable experience until the last stage of their life attain not self-realization but old age, amounting to a second and pitiable childhood, living as a burden on this earth. I have a full recollection that I held these views even whilst I was teaching, that is, in 1911-12, though I might not have expressed them in identical language. How then was this spiritual training to be given? I made the children memorize and recite hymns and read to them from books on moral training, but that was far from satisfying me. As I came into closer contact with them, I saw that it was not through books that one could impart training of the spirit. Just as physical training was to be imparted through physical exercise and intellectual through intellectual exercise, even so, the training of the spirit was possible only through the exercise of the spirit. And the exercise of the spirit entirely depended on the life and character of the teacher. The teacher had always to be mindful of his P's and Q's, whether he was in the midst of his boys or not. It is possible for a teacher situated miles away to affect the spirit of the pupils by his way of living. It would be idle for me, if I were a liar, to teach boys to tell the truth. A cowardly teacher would never succeed in making his boys valiant, and a stranger to self-restraint could never teach his pupils the value of self-restraint. I saw, therefore, that I must be an eternal object lesson to the boys and girls living with me. They thus became my teachers, and I learnt I must be good and live straight, if only for their sake. I may say that the increasing discipline and restraint I imposed on myself at Tolstoy Farm was mostly due to those wards of mine. One of them was wild, unruly, given to lying and quarrelsome. On one occasion, he broke out most violently. I was exasperated. I never punished my boys, but this time I was very angry. I tried to reason with him, but he was adamant and even tried to overreach me. At last, I picked up a ruler lying at hand and delivered a blow on his arm. I trembled as I struck him. I dare say he noticed it. This was an entirely novel experience for them all. The boy cried out and begged to be forgiven. He cried not because the beating was painful to him. He could, if he had so been minded, have paid me back in the same coin, being a stoutly built youth of 17. But he realized my pain in being driven to this violent recourse. Never again after this incident did he disobey me, but I still repent that violence. I am afraid I exhibited before him that day not the spirit, but the brute in me. I have always been opposed to corporal punishment. I remember only one occasion of which I physically punished one of my sons. I have therefore never until this day been able to decide whether I was right or wrong in using the ruler. Probably it was improper, for it was prompted by anger and a desire to punish. Had it been an expression only of my distress, I should have considered it justified, but the motive in this case was mixed. This incident set me thinking and taught me a better method of correcting my students. I do not know whether that method would have availed on the occasion in question. The youngster soon forgot the incident, and I do not think he ever showed great improvement. But the incident made me understand better the duty of a teacher towards his pupils. Cases of misconduct on the part of the boys often occurred after this, but I never resorted to corporal punishment. Thus, in my endeavor to impart spiritual training to the boys and girls under me, I came to understand better and better the power of the Spirit. So friends, that was it. This wonderful extract I just read as Schoolmaster by Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, also known as Bapuji. Hope you liked what you heard. And once again, taking inspiration from Bapuji, the father of our nation, who himself spent life as a teacher for a considerable number of years at Tolstoy Farm in South Africa, with the same spirit, wishing each and every one of you once again a very, very happy Teachers' Day. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Jai Hind.